In part 2 of the $500 Makerspace project, we're going to discuss what tools you need for your budget makerspace. Let's get started. How's it going, guys? Angus here from Makers Muse, and welcome to part 2 of the $500 Makerspace project. The idea is to create a budget makerspace for your kids or yourself so you can get started in creating and 3D printing, 3D modeling at an extremely low budget. Now, in the last video, we discussed what 3D printers you could consider to purchase for your budget makerspace, but in this video, we're going to discuss what tools I recommend to have around those 3D printers and other tools to create things for your makerspace. My philosophy with tools is this: when you're buying a tool for the first time for a project, I recommend buying pretty much the cheapest you can get, because you don't know how often you're going to use it. And if you go straight for the most expensive version, sure, it might be better quality, or will be better quality, but you might not use it enough to get the quality out of it to justify the money you've spent. So a lot of the tools I've spec'd in this video are quite cheap, and I've also got options for slightly more expensive versions should you find you need to go there. Because the philosophy is you buy the cheap tool, and if it breaks, you've justified using it enough to go purchase a more expensive version. But if it never breaks, then why buy the expensive one? Also, don't forget, guys, that the entire list in this video is ever evolving and changing. And I've got an entire list on my website, which I'll keep up to date after this video is made public, to kind of keep this project alive, because I'm sure a lot of you guys will have awesome suggestions for tools that you might like to see in a budget makerspace, so I can keep changing and evolving that online list. Whereas this video, once it's uploaded, is kind of set in stone. So don't forget to hit that link after this video to check out what the current lineup of tools is. So let's kick off this list with the gear you need that revolves around your 3D printer. So I get it, not every makerspace or workshop revolves around a 3D printer, but as I justified in my previous video, in my opinion, a 3D printer is the easiest way to empower creativity. It's the easiest way to start making things when you're just getting started in the world of 3D design and 3D modeling and creating objects. So the tools I've got here revolve around our 3D printer. So this is the Tronxy X1, which I talked about in the previous video, and this is the cheapest machine that I recommend, and everything's sort of based around the price point of this, whereas you can get a more expensive machine. Just keep in mind it will start biting into your overall tool budget. So of course, to start with, you're going to need 3D printing filament. So this is black PLA produced by Tronxy, TronXY. So it's from GearBest, and it is bog standard black PLA plastic. It prints perfectly fine and it works good. There's nothing special about it. It's just cheap black PLA. And I've been printing parts on it on the TronXY X1, and as you can see here, absolutely no issues at all. No under extrusion, very good diameter accuracy. Long past are the days where you buy cheap filament and it's not very good. I mean, it's very uncommon for me to come across cheap filament now that literally doesn't print. Like, sure, it might not have the highest quality coloring, but the dimensional accuracy of cheap filaments these days is very, very good. So I do highly recommend this brand. Also, if you're in America, you can check out Hatchbox. That's also amazingly good for the quality for the price. And really, filament is filament. Just grab yourself a roll, because these cheap machines don't really come with any filament to get you started. Next, you want to stick stuff down to your print bed, so you need a glue stick. Basically, I use glue sticks on the TronXY's bed. It helps parts stick down, and it's an indispensable tool to help stuff stick down to your print surface, whether it's glass or Garolite G10, the fiberglass stuff that's on the Tronxy, or even PEI. Glue stick can help if you have parts that lift from it. It's not absolutely necessary, but I do find a glue stick is extremely cheap insurance to keeping stuff stuck down to your print surface. But then how do you get them off? Well, you need a scraper blade. I have a whole video on how dangerous these can be, so do not take these lightly. This blade is sharpened to a very sharp tip, and if you're scraping parts of a print surface, always scrape away from yourself. You don't want to cause any injuries to yourself or others. It is sharp, but you do need that edge to get under your part to pop it free. Although with the TronXY, the bed does come free and you can kind of flex it. Even so, a paint scraper is a very handy tool to have to get parts off your print surface, and you definitely need one if you have a 3D printer. Next is this. This is a ceramic screwdriver. It's a flathead, and this is indispensable for tuning your stepper drivers. So for these low-end kits, you often need to dial up or down the current of the stepper drivers on the little trim pots, so you need a ceramic screwdriver. These are very, very cheap from websites like GearBest. They're very, very low cost, but they're non-conductive, which is critical for tuning these things. You don't want to put a conductive screwdriver anywhere near that electronics because you have to tune it while it's on, and that can just short circuit it and blow it up. So grab yourself a ceramic screwdriver. Keep in mind it is ceramic, it's very, very fragile. Don't use it to pry things or do anything else except adjusting your trim pots, and you'll be thankful to have one of these on hand. And finally, for our 3D printing lineup, we have this, a pair of tweezers. So I actually love Wheatus as a brand. It's a Chinese brand. I've used Wheatus for a very long time, and they're awesome quality tweezers. So this is just a standard little flat tipped one. It's not pointed, has a rounded flat tip, which is fantastic for grabbing wisps of filament from your nozzle without risking burning your fingers. And also these are great for putting the kits together because you can grab the little nuts from for the T-slots and position them into the T-slots and then put the screws down. They're very, very handy for saving your patience when assembling these kits. So grab yourself a pair of decent tweezers. Often these kits come with really crappy, cheap tweezers with really sharp tips that just bend. So I do recommend just grabbing a pair. Wheatus is a good brand, I can recommend them. Also useful for just general electronics work as well, and I do have a category for that too. Next, we're going to discuss what electronic tools I recommend for our budget makerspace, starting with a soldering iron. A soldering iron is indispensable for repairing electronic circuits or creating projects of your own using electronic components. You need a soldering iron to join on wires to motor leads, to adjust things, to modify things. It's absolutely indispensable if you're getting into any of this sort of hobby. So you don't need an expensive iron at all. This is an extremely cheap one from GearBest. Unfortunately, I made a big mistake when I grabbed it because this is a 110 volt version. I'm in Australia, I need 220 volts. So I can't plug this one into the wall. You don't want to go too cheap with a soldering iron because you do want an adjustment for temperature. That does help you a lot to dial it in because the cheap ones just get hotter and hotter and hotter, which is not great. If you have a little bit more money to spend, I can recommend something like this. This is a genuine Heiko adjustable soldering iron. I use this all the time. It's a better quality brand. It will cost you more money, but it's again an adjustable soldering iron with a temperature adjustment on the side there. But it's still not too expensive for what it is, and this iron I use absolutely all the time, and it works really, really well. But really, cheap ones will do. Just keep in mind the biggest safety concern of soldering irons is melting their own cables. This whole part gets really hot, 300 degrees Celsius or higher, and it will melt through the insulation and it can risk short circuiting. So you do need a stand. You can just make your own stand out of a bit of sheet metal or wire, but you do need to keep the hot part away from any sort of plastic components. That is absolutely critical. Another critical electronic part for your budget makerspace is a multimeter. A multimeter is critical for measuring resistances, current, and continuity when troubleshooting your 3D printer. And I looked around for a cheap one that I could recommend, and I found this little thing, which actually is pretty cool. So it doesn't come with batteries, it takes two little coin cells, and I really like how the leads click into the side here, and it just unwraps like that. And this little meter will measure resistance and continuity as well as diodes. But something I look for in a multimeter is a tone on a continuity check. So if I just press select here, it goes on to a tone mode. It's not very loud, but it does help when you only have two hands and you're trying to figure out if a limit switch is on or off. You can hear that tone, and it does help you fine tune your 3D printer and get it going, because these kits often need a lot of troubleshooting to get them going. It's just because you're not paying much money for them. So this little multimeter is not going to give you like true RMS or anything like that. But do you really need that for a budget makerspace? I would say no. I really like how it clips all into a little compact package like that. Next is, of course, solder. So you might be thinking, I don't want to use lead solder, it's dangerous. And yes, I would wash your hands after touching lead solder, but to be completely honest, the lead-free stuff sucks. It has a higher melting temperature, it tends to be more brittle, it's harder to work with, and it's just a real pain in the ass. This is just basic stuff, 60 to 40 with some flux. You don't use plumbing solder, please. That's completely incorrect for electronics. It has very aggressive flux. You need electronic solder, and it's just really cheap to get. I got that from GearBest. You can get it from your local In Australia, we have J-Car. Basically, just grab some solder. Don't get the little tiny tubes. Get something at least substantial because it's really more cost effective and it will last you a very long time for your electronic projects. And finally, we have breadboards. So breadboards are indispensable for prototyping your electronic projects. And I found this little board on GearBest, which is pretty cool. It's got this little power supply module, so you can power the board with a DC jack, DC in, and it even has a USB as well, which is really handy because getting power into these things has been traditionally a bit of a pain. So you want these little jumper leads as well. And I use these breadboards all the time to prototype electronics. For example, what I have here is a little stepper driver. So this is an easy stepper and a Node MCU, which is a ESP Wi-Fi chip, but it's actually Arduino compatible. They've got an Arduino library for it. And all this is doing is using that to control the stepper motor. And I've got grand plans for this, but I just wanted to see if it would work. These are like $2 steppers and it works fine. But you can see what I mean about the power supply in. It's a bit flaky. So I do like how this board has a little actual power supply board built into it to help avoid any sort of dangerous short circuits or anything. Again, you will need to use a multimeter a lot to fine tune and troubleshoot these, so you definitely need one of those. You can go all out with electronics parts and components, but it really depends what you want to do with your makerspace. This is just what I recommend as like a bare minimum. Again, you might not even be into electronics, you might not want the breadboard. Everyone is different, but you definitely need the soldering iron and a multimeter. So let's move on to the next group of tools. Hand tools. So hand tools is a category where you probably already have a lot lying around your house. Maybe it's from your parents, or maybe it's from like a DIY project you did some time ago. Often you'll get Allen keys from IKEA sets, stuff like that. So you probably already have quite a bit lying around, so scrounge what you can. But I'm gonna go through some of the basic ones I recommend for running a small makerspace revolving around a 3D printer. Starting with side cutters. So side cutters are indispensable for trimming filament, cutting and stripping wires, all of these jobs. And often 3D printers come with side cutters. They often come with ones like this. So these work. They're pretty terrible. Like often the jaws are misaligned, often they're ground terribly. This one's already been damaged. I don't know, I think it came from the factory like that. Often the ends are so fragile they'll bend when you're trying to strip filament or break support material off prints, which again, they're very handy for. So start with these, but if you have a bit more money to spend, I do recommend getting a better pair of side cutters. Using these for jobs you don't care where they get damaged, but get a better pair for your electronic work, or you want to strip wires accurately and that sort of thing. So I actually own like a really expensive pair of side cutters. They're Lindstrom micro side cutters. They cost $100. They have a lifetime warranty. But if you don't want to spend that much money on a pair of side cutters, I quite like these ones. So I found these from GearBest. I looked around for one that was a bit more expensive and had this different type of hinge. This rivet style hinge is pivot rather, is really crap. You can tell a good pair of side cutters by how much wobble there is in the jaws. So this has quite a little wobble. Whereas this one, none at all. So this is a Lodestar pair of side cutters. It says Japan on it. It's definitely not made in Japan. It's definitely made in China. That doesn't discount the fact that it's actually a really, really nice pair of side cutters with the spring there. I do appreciate that instead of the leaf spring. They feel good in the hand, and these are going to become my new electronic side cutters for this project. They're still not that expensive, but it is, again, worth spending a bit more money on tools you use a lot. So maybe grab these down the track if you find you're a bit frustrated with the quality of these ones. But anyway, that's what I mentioned, get cheap tools and then upgrade. And also tool holding is very important. So I like this little cheap vise. So you don't need a full-size vise for this kind of setup, but a vise is very handy to hold small parts while you're soldering them and that sort of thing. You can get another tool called a helping hand with like little alligator clips. I'm not a big fan of those. I do just like using a vise. Works great for me and they're pretty cheap as well. And you just screw it to the side of your bench. Next is snips. So you can just use scissors, but they tend to get blunt and wear out pretty quickly. Snips like this are great for cutting heat shrink, wires, and trimming even filament if you need to at a pinch. They're quite low cost again, and you can even cut thin metal with them if you're determined. I wouldn't recommend it, but these are really, really handy to have on hand, again, for cutting stuff like heat shrink or even sleeving for these electronics kits, these 3D printer kits. Then you want some needle nose pliers or long neck pliers. These are good for getting like nuts and bolts into places or feeding wires through things. This is just a micro pair. You might want one a little bit bigger. I have some on order, they haven't arrived yet. But these are really handy for feeding wires in. You can get ones that have like complete flat, or this is like a combination one with cutter, flat, and ridged at the front for extra grip. Again, fantastic for feeding wires through things. And then you're going to want some sort of socket set, Allen key set, screwdriver set. I found this combination set on GearBest, but it wasn't in stock for me to get it here in time. And I've just built up these tools over time. So for example, this really cheap, from Super Cheap Auto here, like screwdriver, has different bits you can put in, change around. These are like $2 screwdrivers, and I've just slowly built up these hand tools over time. If you don't have these on hand, you can just buy like an all-in-one toolkit. I've got them linked again in my list, where it has like hammers and screwdrivers and all the bigger tools you might need. But again, most people have this sort of stuff on hand, so you probably don't need to buy it, and you definitely don't need to spend much money. Again, get the cheapest ones you can, because if you do break it, then it's justified getting a more expensive version. Okay, now we're going to talk about measuring tools. So arguably these are the most important tools you should have on your workbench, because they allow you to reverse engineer things, do 3D modeling accurately, plan things, and calibrate your 3D printer as well. So arguably a multimeter should be in the measuring category as well. I just put it in electronics. It's very, very critical you get a multimeter. But the other tool you really need is a pair of calipers. So what do you get? Well, this is the cheapest one that I could find that actually is pretty good. These are like $5, and they're plastic with fiber, so they're fiber injection molded plastic, and they're actually really good and really quite repeatable. So on a budget, I would recommend these. I did try a slightly more expensive one. So this is a metal caliper from GearBest, and unfortunately it's complete crap. It's absolute rubbish. It can't get back to zero. The number always changes. It's complete, absolute trash, which is a bit of a shame. But if you do want to get a higher quality caliper, I recommend something like this. So I've had this one since I was 18. And this is an IP54 rated pair of digital calipers. And they're smooth, they work really well, and I use these for all my reverse engineering and design projects, measuring thicknesses. So if I print a calibration print, I can see how thick a wall is, for example. They're very accurate. If you're old school, you can get just a standard vernier caliper and read the indentations. It's actually not too difficult to learn how to do that. And you can even get a dial caliper if you want to go that way. You don't have to worry about batteries in those cases. But with these, the batteries last quite a while, especially with this one, because it's high quality. The battery doesn't get used when the screen's off. But with the cheap ones, the battery is always engaged. The display is just turned off. So the batteries do drain quite quickly in these. But the price is right, that's for sure. So you definitely need a pair of calipers in your tool set. You also need a ruler. I highly recommend these metal rulers. This is just a 6-inch one. You can get a set of 6 and 12-inch rulers. And these are great for figuring out your extruder steps. Like you can mark how far your motors are moving to make sure your E-steps are correct. I recently used this with my Flying Bear Tornado to determine that the steps were double what they should have been. And I was just using this ruler next to the gantry to see it moving. So grab yourself a pair of a metal ruler or a pair of a small and bigger one, because they're much more durable and much more easier to read than plastic ones, and they're thinner, so you can fit them into tighter places. And finally, one more measuring tool that not many people will have is a set square. I often wonder why people don't use set squares to construct 3D printer kits, because it's kind of important that your axes are created at perfect angles to each other, perfect 90-degree angle between your X and Y axis, right? And you need a good quality set square to do it. Now this is absolutely used so well. This is a Toledo version, standard 6-inch B-grade set square, so they have better quality ones than this. I would not go with a cheap one from China, by all means. You get a proper one from Amazon. I'll have a link in my list for a proper set square. They're not that expensive, and these are a lifetime purchase. As long as you don't drop it. As soon as you drop these onto a hard surface, you're gonna throw them out of calibration. So treat them well, treat them with respect. Doesn't matter if they get a bit rusty, but these are very handy for making sure your kits and other projects that you create are perfectly square. So that's measurement tools out of the way. Again, there's many more measurement tools you could purchase, but I don't believe they're necessary for a basic budget makerspace. So let's move on to the most fun category, the power tools category. Okay guys, so let's talk power tools. So obviously on such a strict budget, there's not much room for power tools. Let's be honest, like I would ideally have in a makerspace or workshop a drill press and a bandsaw and an angle grinder and all of these proper power tools. But to start off, and we're talking about something you might be able to have like in a kid's room or something, we're starting with some pretty basic tools and some pretty safe tools. I wouldn't give a kid an angle grinder, for example. But you can do a lot of things with these tools and they are a stepping stone to something greater. So let's start off with the most basic and useful power tool, cordless drill. So this is the cheapest cordless drill you can buy in Australia. I don't know if they even sell them anymore. It was a $22 cordless drill, 12 volt from Kmart. It works perfectly fine for my use. The batteries suck. I mean, this is not going to be used for any sort of industrial purpose. They're just standard crappy NiCads, I believe. But you know, I have it on charge quite often, like all the time, and it's just sitting there, ready to go. It even has proportional power, which is, you know, I think some of them came without it and some of them came with it. Doesn't matter. You need a cordless drill, and they are quite low cost. I've got a link to a Black & Decker one, which is very affordable. And you need bits for your cordless drill. So again, going back to a set of bits you can use on your hand tools, often they'll be able to you can put them into the chuck and use them with your cordless drill too. And with actual drill bits, just get a set like this. You know, this is a 13-piece drill set that goes from 1.5 all the way up to 6.5. I often use the 1.5 to clean out PTFE tubing that's been jammed up in my 3D printers. It's just a little bit smaller than 1.75. Helps a lot to clear jams. And you know, these are just straight bits made in high-speed steel, nothing special. They're not going to be the best. They're not going to allow you to drill hardened steels with your cordless drill, but they will do the job for your projects. Next is a hot air gun, right here. Hot air guns are indispensable for shrinking heat shrink or forming PLA prints after they've been printed or getting rid of wisps. I did a whole video on 5 uses of a hot air gun that you need it for 3D printing. Go check that out. Absolutely get a hot air gun. This is a cheap one from Dick Smith's Electronics, and it's lasted me years. I've had this since I was like 16, I think. It's lasted me forever. It's a one-off purchase and they're going to be very cheap as well. Don't ever try drying your hair with a hot air gun. Please, this thing gets hot. It will melt solder. Do not try to use it for a hairdryer. And similarly, don't try to use a hairdryer to replace a hot air gun. It doesn't get hot enough. And the next power tool is a hot glue gun, the Lazy Man's adhesive. I love using hot glue guns for stitching things together. You know, you just slap it on one side and push the parts together, and with most materials, it just holds. Hot glue guns are indispensable for quick projects where you want to just slap parts together. It works for 3D printed parts fine as well. Just keep in mind, these cheap ones just get hotter and hotter and hotter, and they have different versions now which heat up to like a low temp with low temp sticks and high temp with high temp sticks. I will say with hesitation, get the high temperature ones because it has a higher bonding strength. But keep in mind, if you touch if you touch the nozzle or the glue drips on you, it's basically like napalm. It will stick and burn. So be very careful with these. Treat them like a soldering iron. Treat them like you would treat the hot end of a 3D printer, and you won't get burnt because they do get very hot. But a hot glue gun is indispensable, and grab yourself a nice pack of hot glue sticks so you always have them on hand for those projects. And like I said, there's tons of other power tools you could get for specific projects. This is just the bare basics I would recommend to get started. And also I'd love to hear your comments in the video description of other tools you might recommend for people starting out. So let's go on to the most important category, which is safety. So safety is often overlooked when you're skimping out on price, and that's really bad. So if we're making a makerspace, we have to take safety into consideration, starting with a first aid kit. You need a first aid kit in the house, regardless of how cheap you're going on this makerspace adventure. I use this, which is a very old New South Wales and ACT Guide Dog Association first aid kit. I probably need to update it, but I haven't really hurt myself or given myself many boo-boos, but it has all the stuff I need. It has gloves, it has wadding, it has betadine I put in, and it has band-aids, everything you need for minor injuries because no matter how careful you are, you can get cuts and scrapes, and you do need to treat them carefully so they don't get infected. And you are working with equipment that can burn you, so it's very important to have a first aid kit on hand. Do not skimp on this, please. Get yourself a first aid kit, or at least make sure you have one in the house that's nearby. Also, make sure you have a pair of safety glasses. I mean, you only have 2 eyes and they last you for your life, so it's extremely reckless to work with power tools without having safety glasses, and even when working with 3D printers, it can be reckless to not have safety glasses. I just use a really cheap pair. Like 3D printers often even come with these, and they're plenty safe, plenty good enough for what we need to do. If you're cutting ends of filament, like you're cutting PLA or removing support material, especially with PETG, it often fails catastrophically and shatters. You want this. You don't want the plastic going in your eyes, please. They're like $4. Get yourself a pair of safety glasses and use them when you're working with things that might ping into your eyes. If you stop and think, oh, this might actually be a bad idea, I might want to put safety glasses on. Actually do it? Thanks. Okay, final thing is a smoke alarm. I have a hardwired smoke alarm system in this place that I'm renting. It's actually required by Australian law. But if you are working, say, in a smaller room, like a garage or an older house without a smoke alarm, just buy a cheap battery-powered one and put it above the Makerspace. So basically, we can't watch our 3D printers all the time, and these cheap kits can fail catastrophically. It has been known to happen. I try to avoid recommending kits that do it, but if a kit fails, it goes into thermal runaway and it doesn't detect it and just goes up in flames, you need a smoke alarm to detect it. You don't want your house burning down because of an electronics failure. It's absolutely critical to have a smoke alarm in your makerspace. They're not expensive, and just don't skip on it. So those 3 things you absolutely need. You should buy them. Don't skimp. Okay, final thing is storage. So storage is very much a personal preference, depending on how big your projects are, how many things you have, and what you're trying to do. I actually personally like these sort of things. These drawers aren't too large or too small, and I store all sorts of things in here. Like, for example, this one's got various feeder gears and nozzles and stuff in it. And you can put labels on them if you like, if you're organized like that, but I just kind of put stuff in vague categories and memorize where they are. I've linked to a few in my list of where you can get storage compartments. Often people have storage on hand. I mean, you can use the cardboard filament boxes that your filament comes in for storage if you're really on a budget. A lot of you mentioned that you don't have much space, so storage is critical to keep clutter away from your working area. So it doesn't matter what it is, I've linked to a few I recommend. I like these. Your preferences may be different, but you need some sort of storage for your budget. Makerspace. So that's going to do it for the second part of this budget $500 Makerspace series, guys, on Makers Muse. Again, remember, we're trying to keep it at or below the cost of an Xbox One X. So if you're considering buying your child that for Christmas, maybe you want to get them an entire Makerspace instead. Might be a better idea. I don't know. And in the next video, we're going to talk about getting a cheap computer system to run the software we need for our Makerspace. So it might be a bit controversial. I'm in Australia, so the systems I use to get cheap hardware may or may not work for you. We'll see. But if you enjoyed this video series, guys, please hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments any further suggestions you might have for this series. Any other tools or things you'd like to see. I really, really do appreciate it, and I read every comment. So till next time, guys, I look forward to seeing you again very shortly here on Makers Muse. Catch you later, guys. Bye.
Here's the latter half of the 20th century, and man has sent rockets into deep space. He has placed satellites into orbit. And he has actually walked in space.